Have you ever given everything you had to someone? Your time, your savings, your whole heart, and still been made to feel like you were asking for too much? I'm 63 years old. I live in a 2-bedroom house in Barrie, Ontario, the same house where I raised my son after his father passed. The backyard still has the old cedar swing set my late husband, Walter, built when our boy was 4. I never took it down. I don't know. Maybe I thought someday there'd be grandchildren climbing on it. There aren't. Not yet. And the way things have been going, I'm not sure there ever will be. My name is Carol, and this is the story of how I spent 6 years quietly funding a life I wasn't allowed to be part of, and what finally made me stop. Walter died in the spring of 2009, pancreatic cancer. He was 51. Our son Brendon, was 16. He took it harder than he let on. Teenage boys don't cry in front of their mothers, or at least Brendon didn't. But I could see it in the way he went quiet at dinner, the way he stopped listening to music in his room. The house got very still after Walter left. I went back to work full-time at the insurance office where I'd been part-time for years. I picked up extra shifts. I sold Walter's truck. I did what you do. You put one foot in front of the other, because someone is watching you do it and taking notes on how to survive. Brendon pulled himself together by the time he was 18. He was sharp, always had been, and got into the business program at Ryerson. I helped where I could. Tuition, his laptop, his first month's rent on a shared apartment in Toronto. He called every Sunday without fail. We had that. Even when we disagreed about things, we had our Sunday calls. He met Tanya Sherwood in his 3rd year. I want to be careful here because I know how these stories go. The mother-in-law is always the villain. I've heard it. I'm not interested in playing that role, and I wasn't back then either. When Brendon first brought Tanya home for Thanksgiving, I made her favorite. She'd mentioned offhand that she loved butter chicken, and I spent 2 days learning to make it properly. I wanted her to feel welcome. I genuinely did. Tanya Sherwood was beautiful and confident, and had a way of entering a room like she'd already decided she was the most interesting person in it. That's not a criticism. Confidence is something I've always admired. She had a good job in marketing, came from a family in Mississauga that, by all appearances, was comfortable. Her mother Denise sent Christmas cards with professional photos in them. The whole family in coordinated outfits, that sort of thing. Brendon adored her. That was enough for me in the beginning. They got engaged in the fall of 2017. Brendon called me a Sunday early. Saturday night, actually, which should have told me something, because Brendon never broke pattern unless something big had happened. He was so happy. I cried on the phone. The good kind of crying. The wedding was June 2018. Beautiful day. They held it at a vineyard in Niagara-on-the-Lake. It was not an inexpensive venue. Brendon mentioned, about 4 months before the wedding, that Tanya's parents were only able to contribute a certain amount and that they were a little short. He didn't ask me outright. He wasn't like that, but he didn't have to. I transferred $8,000 into his account that week. He thanked me, and we moved on and never spoke of it again. I told myself it was a gift, for the wedding, for the beginning of their life together. It was the first of many things I would tell myself. They bought a condo in Etobicoke after the wedding. Nice building, concierge, rooftop terrace, the works. Brendon was doing well at work by then, some kind of project coordinator role at a tech firm. Tanya had moved into a better position too. From the outside they looked settled, successful, on their way. I visited when I could. I'm a 2-hour drive from Toronto on a good day, longer in winter. I didn't want to be the kind of mother who showed up uninvited, so I always called ahead. Sometimes Tanya was warm on those visits, genuinely warm. We'd have wine and talk about her work. And she'd ask about Barrie, and I felt like we were building something. Other times there was a distance that I couldn't quite place. Like I'd arrived in the middle of a conversation I hadn't been invited to. I noticed small things. The way she'd answer her phone in the middle of dinner and Brendon wouldn't say anything. The way certain topics, money, family, future plans, had a way of ending conversations rather than starting them. I filed these things away. I didn't act on them. You don't want to be the mother who poisons her son's marriage with her own suspicions. In 2020, Tanya lost her job. The whole industry contracted during the pandemic. It wasn't her fault, and I didn't think of it that way. Brendon called to tell me, and his voice had that particular tightness that I recognized from, when he was a boy and had gotten himself into something he didn't know how to get out of. I asked if they needed help. Just for a couple of months, he said, until she lands something new. I started sending $1,200 a month, just to help cover the gap, they said. Just until she found something. She didn't find something, not for 8 months. And when she did, it was part-time consulting work that I was told paid much less than before. By the time Tanya was working again, the transfers had become routine. Brendon had stopped framing them as temporary. I had stopped asking. My financial advisor, a kind woman named Patricia Huang, who I've worked with for years, sat me down in the spring of 2021 and asked me, gently, whether the monthly transfers I was making were going to be ongoing. I told her I thought it was a bridge. She looked at her papers and then at me and said, Carol, in the last 14 months you've transferred just under $17,000. I hadn't added it up. I know, I said, which was a lie. In November of 2021, Brendon called on a Tuesday, not a Sunday. My heart did its little skip. We're having a baby, he said. I sat down on the kitchen floor, not because I was overcome, I was, but because my legs just went out from under me. I ended up sitting against the refrigerator, phone pressed to my ear, laughing and crying at the same time. Walter would have been over the moon. I thought about that. I thought about that cedar swing set still standing in the backyard. Is it a boy or a girl? I asked. We don't know yet. We're waiting. Okay, I said. Okay. That's okay. I was going to be a grandmother. I start setting money aside immediately. Not for them. I'd been doing that anyway, but for the baby specifically. A proper education fund, the kind Walter had always said he wanted to start for our own kids, and then didn't because we kept meaning to get around to it. I set up an RSP. I bought a rocking chair for the second bedroom in my house, the room I'd kept as a spare but had always privately thought of as the future grandchild room, which is the kind of hope you carry quietly when you're a widow in a house that got too big for one person. I asked Brendon, sometime in February, whether they'd thought about what kind of help they'd want when the baby came. Whether I could come down for a few weeks, maybe, help with night feeds, cooking, whatever they needed. There was a pause. Let's see how Tanya's feeling, he said. I said, of course, of course. I sent a gift basket to their condo that week, nicer than I probably needed to. Organic onesies, a hand-knitted blanket from a shop downtown I'd always liked, one of those white noise machines that all the parenting blogs were talking about. I included a card that said I couldn't wait to meet them, meaning the baby. I meant every word. Tanya texted me a photo of everything laid out on their kitchen counter. She wrote, so cute, thank you, 3 words, no punctuation after cute. I saved the text anyway. Matilda was born in July 2022. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. They named her Matilda Rose. I found out by text. Not a call, a text with a photo attached. Brendon sent it at 11:47 at night, and I was already in bed, and my phone buzzed on the nightstand, and I fumbled for it, and there she was. This tiny, red-faced, perfect little person. I stared at that photo for a long time. I pressed my hand against the screen the way you do when you're not thinking straight. I called the next morning to ask when I could come. Give us a week or 2, Tanya said. She sounded tired, which was fair. We're just getting our routine down. I waited 2 weeks. I called again. Maybe another week? It's been a lot. I waited another week. Then I drove to Toronto without asking, because I didn't think I could bear to be told to wait again. They let me in. Tanya looked exhausted, which was understandable. Brendon looked the way new fathers look, hollowed out but flooded. Matilda was asleep in a bassinet in the living room, all wrapped up in a striped swaddle. I crouched down and looked at her little face for a long time. Can I hold her? I asked. Tanya was already across the room lifting Matilda up before I could reach her. She just settled, Tanya said. If we move her now, she'll wake up, and then she won't sleep again for hours. I stood back. I said I understood. I helped make dinner, washed some dishes, held Tanya's water glass out when her hands were full. I stayed 3 hours and drove back to Barrie in the dark and cried most of the way up the 400. The cedar swing set was there when I pulled into the driveway. I sat in the car looking at it for a while. I want to be honest about the months that followed because I think it's important to say, I gave them the benefit of the doubt for a long time. New parents are overwhelmed. Boundaries around newborns are reasonable. I had read enough parenting articles online. My sister kept sending me links to know that grandparent overreach was a real thing, and I didn't want to be that person. So I waited. And I visited when invited. And I did not push. What I did not do during any of this time was stop sending money. $1,200 a month had become $1,500 somewhere along the way. I'm not sure exactly when. There had been a conversation about their condo fees going up. Or maybe it was car insurance. I can't remember which. And I'd said something about being able to help a little more, and somehow a little more had become $300 extra per month. And then it had just stayed there. In the spring of 2023, about 8 months after Matilda was born, Brendon mentioned they were looking at buying a house. In Toronto? I asked. Just outside. Oakville, maybe. Or Burlington. These were not inexpensive places. That's a big step, I said. How are you managing the down payment? Another pause. Brendon's pauses had started to concern me. They had a texture to them, like he was working out what he was allowed to say. We're hoping you might be able to help with part of it, he said. I asked how much. $30,000. I didn't say anything for a moment. Brendon, I said, that's most of my accessible savings. I know. We wouldn't ask if we weren't in a tight spot. What about Tanya's parents? They've already given what they can. I thought about Patricia Huang sitting across from me with her papers. I thought about $17,000. I thought about the fact that I had now been sending money every month for 3 years, and I had held my granddaughter exactly twice. Let me think about it, I said. I did think about it. I thought about it for 2 weeks, and then I transferred the $30,000 because the alternative was imagining Brendon's face when I said no, and I wasn't strong enough to do that. The house was in Burlington. A nice semi-detached on a quiet street, the kind of neighborhood with mature trees and good school ratings. I helped them move in. I drove down with my car packed full of things I'd bought. A proper coffee maker since theirs was broken. A set of pots and pans, because Brendon had mentioned Tanya wasn't happy with their old ones. Some groceries to stock the pantry for the first week. Matilda was 11 months old. She was sitting up on her own by then, pulling herself toward things, babbling in that specific way babies do when they're practicing language. She looked at me when I came in the door, and I remember thinking, she doesn't know who I am. She was born 11 months ago, and she doesn't know who I asked. That afternoon, if I could take her for a little walk in the stroller while Brendon and Tanya dealt with some boxes, just around the block. Fresh air for both of us. Tanya said she'd just gone down for a nap. Matilda was not asleep. Matilda was sitting on the kitchen floor playing with a wooden spoon. I didn't say anything. I went back to unpacking boxes. Later that evening, when Matilda was getting fussy and Tanya was trying to settle her, I reached out instinctively, the way grandmothers do, the way women who've raised children do, and I started to take her from Tanya's arms, just to give Tanya a break, just to help. Tanya stepped back, not dramatically, just one step. I've got her, she said. And she did. She had her. She always had her. I drove back to Barrie alone that night with a set of empty boxes in my trunk and the particular kind of sadness that has no name. I talked to my sister Vera about it that September. Vera is younger than me by 4 years and has always been more direct. We met for lunch at a place in Barrie we've been going to for years, and I told her everything. The money, the visits, the holding, all of it. Vera put down her fork. Carol, she said, how much have you given them in total? I had actually added it up by then. Wedding, $8,000. Monthly transfers over 3 years at an average of $1,400, about $50,000. The down payment, $30,000. Miscellaneous. Baby furniture I'd bought as a gift, their car repair that one time, groceries, probably another $4,000. Around $92,000, I said. Vera stared at me. And you've held Matilda how many times? Twice, Ed. Properly. She was quiet for a long moment. Does Brendon know how much it all adds up to? I don't think he's added it up. Does Tanya? I thought about this. Tanya was not a person who missed numbers. She worked in marketing. She was sharp about budgets and costs and physicianing. Tanya knew what things cost. I think she knows, I said. Then you need to decide something, Vera said. Because right now you're paying for a seat at a table you're not allowed to sit at. I want to say I made my decision immediately. I didn't. I went home and I lay awake that night in the dark, and I thought about Walter and what he would say. Walter had been a straightforward man. He didn't believe in ambiguity when it came to fairness. He would have said something like, Nobody's owed your generosity, Carol. You give because you want to give. The minute you're giving because you're afraid to stop, that's not generosity anymore. That's something else. I thought about that. I thought about Matilda's face when I'd walked into the Burlington house and how she'd looked at me like I was a stranger. Because I was. I called Brendon the following Sunday. I waited for the usual call, but he didn't ring, so I called him. This was unusual, and I think he knew something was coming. I need to talk to you about the money, I said. He was quiet. I've been helping you and Tanya for a few years now, I said. And I've been glad to, because that's what family does, and I love you. But I added it up recently, Brendon, and it's close to $93,000. A longer silence. Mom! I'm not finished, I said. I'm not saying I want it back. It was given freely. But I do want to say that alongside all of that, I've seen my granddaughter twice. I've never given her a bath. I've never had her fall asleep on my shoulder. I've been kept at arm's length in a way that I've been trying to be patient about, but I've run out of patience. Brendon's voice when he spoke was careful and low. Tanya has her way of doing things. I understand that, I said. And I've respected it for over a year. What I'm telling you is that I won't be sending money going forward. Not because I'm punishing anyone, but because I've realized that the arrangement we've had isn't working. Not for me. The call ended shortly after. It wasn't a fight, exactly. It was worse. It was quiet in the particular way things go quiet when someone doesn't know what to say because they know you're right. What happened next? I'll be honest, I didn't fully expect. 2 days after that call, I got a text from Tanya. Not from Brendon, from Tanya, which was the first time she had ever initiated contact with me directly about anything of substance. Carol, I think we should talk. Can we set up a call this week? I said yes. She called Thursday evening. She started by saying she knew I had concerns. She said she hoped I understood that she had always had Matilda's best interests at heart. She said that early childhood was a critical bonding period, and that she had done a lot of research and had very clear ideas about how she had to manage Matilda's care environment. I let her talk. She had a lot to say about routines and attachment theory and consistency. All of it was reasonable on paper. All of it was delivered in the tone of a person who had prepared for a negotiation. When she finished, I said, Tanya, I appreciate you sharing all of that. I have one question. Of course! In the last 14 months, how many times have I been allowed to hold Matilda? Silence. Twice, I said, when she didn't answer. And I've given your family close to $100,000 in that same period. I don't think those two things can coexist anymore. What Tanya said next surprised me. She said, I didn't know it was that much, and I believed her. Or at least, I believed she believed it. There's a way of not wanting to see things that makes them genuinely invisible, and I think that's where Tanya had been living. Well, I said, now you know. I'm going to tell you what happened with my son-in-law Garrett. Garrett Sherwood is Tanya's brother. He had been, over the years, the invisible third presence in various financial conversations. I had heard his name attached to several decisions and recommendations. He was in real estate and fancied himself something of a financial mind. Brendon had mentioned, occasionally, that Garrett thought this was a good investment, or Garrett thought that was the wrong move. I had never questioned this. It wasn't my business. What I found out through Vera, whose daughter happens to know someone in Garrett's office building, the way small worlds work, was that approximately $20,000 of what I had transferred over the years had been funneled into a property deal that Garrett was running. A short-term flip that hadn't gone the way he'd planned. He had needed private investors. Apparently my son had been one of them, with money that originated with me without my knowledge or consent. I called Brendon about this on a Monday, not a Sunday. He picked up on the second ring. I told him what I'd heard. I asked him if it was true. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Mom, I was going to tell you. When? I asked. He didn't answer. I didn't raise my voice. I'm 63 years old. I've buried a husband and raised a son alone, and I've learned that shouting doesn't move anything. It just makes the walls shake. I told Brendon that I was disappointed, that I had trusted him, that the money wasn't the point, though the money was real, and that what hurt most was that I had been making decisions based on a version of things that wasn't accurate. Garrett said it was going to be repaid, Brendon said. Did you ask me first? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I told Brendon I needed some time. He said he understood. He said he was sorry, and this time the sorry had a different quality to it. Not the reflexive sorry of a person who has been caught, but something heavier, something that had been waiting to come out for a while. I know, sweetheart, I said. I know. The months that have passed since that conversation have been hard. And also, in some way, I'm still working out how to name, clarifying. I did not stop talking to my son. I want to be very clear about that. Brendon is my son and I love him, and whatever happened, whatever allowed him to make the choices he made, I am not interested in cutting him out of my life. But I did change things. The transfers stopped. Completely and immediately. I wrote to Patricia Huang and told her, and she responded with a single line. I think that's the right decision, Carol. Garrett Sherwood, for his part, came back to Brendon and admitted the property deal had failed. He had lost most of what was put in. Brendon told me this himself on one of our calls, and his voice when he said it had that hollowed quality again. But different from the new father kind. This was the sound of someone reckoning with something. Garrett did not contact me directly. I was not surprised. I didn't pursue it legally, not because I didn't have grounds, but because I made a considered decision that the emotional cost of that route would exceed whatever I might recover. I told Patricia Huang about it, for the record, and we adjusted my planning accordingly. Tanya, in the weeks after our phone call, did something I didn't expect. She started sending me photos. Not texts with 3 words, photos with captions. Matilda at the park today. She loved the swings. Or, she said something that sounded like up this morning. We think she meant the birds. Little things. The kind of things you send someone when you're trying to build something you neglected. I responded to everyone. In February, she asked if I would like to come for a weekend. I drove down on a Friday afternoon. The Burlington street looked different in winter, bare-limbed and quiet. Brendon met me at the door. We stood in the hallway for a moment without speaking, and then he hugged me. A real hug, the kind that lasts a beat too long because both people needed it. Matilda was in the kitchen. 18 months old by then, all solid little legs and that particular toddler determination. She looked at me when I came in and Tanya crouched down beside her and said, Matilda, this is Grandma Carol. Can you say hi? And Matilda looked at me with those dark eyes. She has Walter's eyes. I hadn't noticed until that moment, but she does, and she said, just that, just hi. 2 letters. Tanya looked at me. I looked at Tanya and she said, would you like to hold her? I said yes. I sat down in their kitchen chair, and Tanya placed Matilda in my arms, and she was warm and solid and smelled like baby's shampoo, and she twisted around to look at my face with that total unself-conscious curiosity that only very young children have. I did not cry. I had promised myself I wasn't going to cry. I cried. Things are not fixed. I want to be honest about that. Trust is not a switch, and you can't just decide to turn it back on. The money is gone, and I've accepted that. Some of it was given freely, and some of it was used in ways I didn't know about, and I've had to make peace with both of those truths, which are easier some days than others. But here is what I know. The day I stopped sending money was the day things started, slowly and unevenly, to change. Not because the money was leverage. I never thought of it that way, and I don't want you to either, but because I had been making myself invisible in my own life. Shrinking to fit a space someone else had decided was the right size for me. And when I stopped shrinking, there was suddenly room for something else to grow. Matilda and I have a Saturday morning routine now. Brendon drops her at my place in Barrie twice a month, more in summer, and we spend the morning however she wants. Right now she's obsessed with the backyard. She goes straight for the cedar swing set every time. The one Walter built. She doesn't know who built it, not yet. But she will, I'll tell her. Some mornings I push her on that swing and I watch her little face go from serious to delighted and back again, with every arc, and I think about everything it took to get to this moment. The years of patience, the money I didn't protect, the conversations I waited too long to have. I think about Walter too. I think he would say, see, you figured it out. You always figure it out. Maybe, but I wish it hadn't taken so long. If you're out there right now, and I suspect some of you are, watching yourself get smaller to keep someone comfortable, sending help that's never quite reciprocated, waiting to be invited into your own grandchild's life. Hear me when I say that your love is not a budget. It is not a transaction. And the moment it starts to feel like one, You are allowed to say so. You are allowed to say so.